Yeah, hi Silpa. So we'll wait for a few minutes. I think there are few other students to join. So otherwise we'll start, okay?
Okay, okay, no problem. Take care.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll start. I think uh, if they wanted to join, so they will join. So we'll start with the session, okay? So hi Silpa. I think we already had introduction session, correct? So
Mhm.
am I audible properly or there's just
Yes, yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
okay? So Silpa, sorry, I would like you to introduce yourself again because I don't remember exactly because there were many people who joined at the demo classes. So can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, hi, this is Shilpa, and I was doing my master's in 2015 in computer science, and I have 7 years of experience in full stack Java development, and I'm very new to this Python technology and would like to know in and out about Python development. Yeah, this is at my overall,
Okay.
regarding why you need this Python and learning stuff.
Okay, Silpa. Thank you. Uh, okay, so in our demo classes, I think we were actually talking about the interpreter and compiler, if you remember. Correct. So, okay. So before starting with the session, so one thing that I would like it from you guys, like you have to keep the session interactive. Like you should be asking the questions in between, and also if you don't get any concepts and you feel like there's something which you are missing, okay, and you definitely should stop me then and there, and you can ask the questions, okay. So this should happen because the communication should happen two-way. So communication, if it is happening two-way, then I think uh, also I understand that yeah, people are understanding the concepts. Okay. Otherwise, it is a kind of one way. So one way is like just delivering the speech and then don't care anything and whether the person in front is actually getting the points or not. So I also don't get it. So I think for my satisfaction, I think you should be asking the question so that uh, I am convinced that yeah, I am able to make you understand the topic. Okay.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's very good. Like you have the Java experience. Okay, so at least a programming language experience will help you to understand this Python very easily because anyway, all the languages are same, only the syntax of the languages are different. So that is the only thing that you have to learn here. Apart from that, you already have the idea of writing the logics and all. So logic building is one part of the programming, and writing the syntax is one part of the programming. Correct? So I think you told me that you have a experience in Java. So my next question is, so whether you were a developer or some other role you were having.
I was working as a full stack developer from
Oh,
backend and frontend. So
okay, okay, then that's great. So I think you have the complete idea then. Okay, so definitely in Java, you would have heard of compiler, correct? So that there is also a compiler like uh, for Java, the compiler we have JDK, correct? So JDK
mhm.
is actually required to actually compile a Java program. Uh, Similarly, we are going to talk about the compiler, which actually compiler and interpreter. Okay, here in Python. I'll share my screen. Okay, then we will
Yep,
continue.
yep. Wait, yeah.
Okay, okay, so we'll start with the introduction to language. Okay, so that is our first topic.
Mhm.
So we have theoretical means topics in the starting. So it may be boring for you guys because the theoretical part definitely is will look like boring, but I think to understand the basics and the depth of the Python, I think you should be aware of this theoretical knowledge as well. So I'll just quickly cover these topics and then we'll actually do the hands-on on Python. Okay. So
Okay.
yeah. So we have the first question is what is language? Correct. So these are the topics. So language, I think we already talked about. So language is nothing but a medium by which we communicate. Correct. And definitely when you talk about a programming language, so there also we are communicating with a machine. Here we don't have a human, but we have a machine. And if you want to communicate with a machine, so we need definitely we need to have a programming language. Okay. So that is uh, and a programming language. I think if you define it in your terms. So a programming language is a formal language that is used to write a computer program, correct? Means we write a program and then computer understand that program and then in return we get an output, okay? So that is a kind of, the output is a kind of language which is spoken by a machine. So that output that you want, okay? It consists of a set of rules, symbols and syntaxes that allows programmers to communicate instruction to a computer in a way that it can understand and execute. Okay, so programming language can be broadly categorized into several types, including procedural programming language, object-oriented programming language, and functional programming language, and there is a scripting language. Okay, so there are four kinds of programming language. So definitely you have heard of object-oriented programming language, and we are mostly concerned on that programming language only because in order to develop an application or large application, we always require object oriented programming language, and that's why we mostly we focus on this type only. We don't generally we don't actually study about procedural and functional and scripting. Okay, scriptings are actually nowadays used in terms of like is automation task, like a small task that you have, so you can definitely automate them with the help of a script. So scripting language are also popular, but not that like object oriented programming language. So Java, I think if you have studied, so Java is definitely object oriented programming language, and Java is used for a very large software application development, very complex and uh, means complex and very long modules. I think if you wanted to develop, so that at that point of time, you definitely need an object-oriented programming language that like Java, C++, Python, and also we have C#. Okay, so these are called as an object-oriented programming language. And about procedural, if we talk about, so procedurals are nothing but a set of procedures that you write. So all the problems are means programming language is nothing but to actually solve a complex problem. So complex problems are solved by writing a small procedures. So that is called as a procedural programming language. So if you have the bigger task can be like in order to calculate, in order to, I think the complex task you can imagine, like you need to actually write a program which actually does the multiplication from 1 to 1 lakh or 2 lakh, okay? Or this can be a complex problem, means very, I think, lengthy problem, which actually requires to, means what we can do, we can write a small recursive functions in order to solve this bigger problem. And for that, definitely we are going to write a small procedures. Okay, so they are nothing, they are called as a procedural programming language. So we started with C. So you must have seen in C language we are writing functions, correct? So those functions, and they are means you also call them as a modules. I think at that time we also call them as a modules, and also they are called as a subroutines. Okay, so and we write them in order to reuse. Okay, means suppose if we have some repetitive task that is going to be repeated again in future, so we put them inside a function and then we call that function again in order to reuse that. Okay, so that's how a procedural programming we used to write earlier. And the examples are like C, Pascal, and Fortran. Okay, then object oriented, we already know that the language there are where the concepts uh, is based on the object, means that is called as an object-oriented programming language. And then we have functional programming language. So functional programming language are based on the types of based on the concepts of mathematical functions. Okay. Here in case of functional programming language, uh, we write mathematical functions, and also like you would have heard of Erlang. Okay, so Erlang is a language which actually we are terms which are used in terms of functional programming language, and they are not very popular, so that's why we don't actually study them. And the fourth one is a scripting language. A scripting language we already talked about. So it is like JavaScript, Python, and the Ruby. So if we talk about a scripting language, so you Python is most popularly used in case of a scripting language. So there can be a small automation task which has to be completed by writing a very small lines of code. So that is where the Python comes into picture, and those languages are called as a scripting language. And one of the very basic difference between a scripting language and the object-oriented programming language is object-oriented programming language are basically compiled, and the scripting languages are mostly interpreted. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you the difference between interpreted and the compiled language. So compiled language are nothing where the compiler actually compiles the code into machine code, and interpreted language are those languages where the interpreter actually translates the code into machine level code. So there means scripting language basically works on the interpreter. So that's the rule. But now I think in when we proceed ahead in the topic, so you'll understand means how Python is both like a scripting and programming language both. Okay, so we'll be seeing first of all, so what is the difference between translator and compiler, or you can say interpreter and compiler. Okay, so first of all, we are going to see what is interpreter and compiler. First of all, interpreter, we'll talk about interpreter, and then we'll jump to the compiler. Okay, so the compiler you already have heard of, like Java is a compiled language. Okay, so there we are compiling the language, and then we are getting the output. Okay, now we'll talk about interpreter. What is the process of actually uh, converting the code into machine level code? So that we will see. Okay, an interpreter is nothing but a small program. Okay, if you have a new machine in your means recently if you have bought a machine, and in that you installed a language. Okay, like you install Python or any Java or anything. So definitely while you install that language, means it will install this program like interpreter or a compiler. It is based on the language that you are going to install. Suppose if you install Python, so it is going to install interpreter internally inside your machine. Okay, and then when you write Python code, this interpreter actually catches that code and then converts that code to a machine level code. Okay, so that's how it works in the backend, and people don't get to know what is working in the backend. Okay, so that's how the translation of the code happens. But now there is a difference how the translation happens. Okay, so in case of interpreter, what it does, it actually suppose if you have written uh, 5 to 100 lines of code, and and interpreter has to read each lines. Okay, but how that will happen? So what it will do, it will it will take the complete code as an input. Okay, suppose if you have written 100 lines of code, so all the 100 lines of code is taken as an input for an interpreter, and then it will convert that to a machine code on the fly. Okay, it does not read it line by line. Okay, sorry, yeah, the interpreter will read the code line by line, and then it will interpret it. Okay, so and then it will analyze it, and immediately it will execute it. Okay, so the basic difference is like it will not create an intermediate file, so directly will get the output without converting it to an intermediate file. Okay, so in Java, if you have heard of, like if you compile a code, what happens, it will generate an intermediate file that is a uh, means I don't remember exactly what is the extension of that file. Means if you just compile a Java file, so it generates a OBJ file. Okay, I don't remember that exactly, but I think you must be knowing that. So that is an intermediate file which actually helps us when we recompile the code. Okay, so while recompiling the code, that intermediate file is actually help improving the performance of the compilation. Okay, so that is an intermediate file that gets generated when we compile the code. Okay, but in case of interpreter, no any intermediate file is getting generated, and directly the output is given to you. Okay, in that way we call that interpreter as faster than the compiler, because directly you get the output without any intermediate file getting generated in the backend. Okay, so that's why interpreters are considered to be faster than the compiler. Okay, but there is a means there are drawbacks. Okay, that we'll see at the end once we actually cover both the topics. So unlike compiler, which translates the entire machine program code into machine code and produces an executable file that can be run independently, an interpreter executes the program directly from the source code. Okay, so that's we already discussed that. Means the interpreter will execute the code directly. It will not wait for it to generate the intermediate file. Okay, so interpreted programs, interpreted language such as Python or JavaScript or Ruby rely on the interpreter to execute the code. Okay, interpreted language are generally easier to learn and use than compiled language, but they can be slower in execution because they need to perform the translation process every time the code is run. Okay, so this I talked. Means in case of compilation, what happens, it generates an intermediate file. Okay, and so again, if you recompile the code, it is not going to read the code again. Okay, already it will work on the compiled code. Means it will work on the intermediate file directly. It will not at all go to the original code. So that way it becomes faster. Okay, so the compiler become faster and interpreter becomes slower here. Okay, in case of recompiler. But if you just execute it first time, I think in that case interpreter becomes faster. Okay, okay, so are you getting the concepts like interpreter and compiler? Any confusion till now? Hello, are you there? Hello, are you there or are you muted? Hello, am I audible?
Okay, now when you pinged, I don't hear it, but yeah.
Okay, I thought that there is some issue in the there is a network issue, or that's why I wanted to confirm. Okay, so you are already there. Thank you. Okay.
Go ahead. I can hear
Yeah,
you.
yeah, we'll start. Okay, so I think, yeah, in summary, means we described what is interpreter. Okay, in summary, interpreter is a program that reads and executes code written in a high level programming language by translating it to a machine code on the fly. Okay, it is an alternative to a compiler and is commonly used for the interpreted programming languages. Okay, so that's all about interpreter. Okay, now we'll talk about compiler. Okay, so So compiler is also an kind of a small program only that actually resides in your machine, and it takes the your source code as an input, and it will convert that source code into a machine code. And this conversion happens. This conversion will happen different than interpreter. Okay, means it is the way of conversion is different in case of compiler. Okay, so it will translate the entire source code into machine code before the execution. Okay, and it will give you a intermediate file, and that is called as an uh, like you call it as an a binary file, you can say. Or and in Python, I think it is called as a .pyc file. Okay, that gets generated when you actually compile a Python code or any object-oriented programming language. If you just compile it, so definitely you'll see a means a byte code. I think if you compile a C language, so you'll get a byte code. If you compile a Python code, you'll get a .pyc file. If you compile a Java language, you'll get some uh, there is some extension for Java. I don't remember that exactly, but anyway, an intermediate file gets generated uh, if we actually compile a programming language. So unlike an interpreter, a compiler translates the entire source code into machine code before execution. Okay, producing a standalone executable file that can run independently. Means suppose if you don't have the source code and if you have an intermediate file, but that also you can get an output, and that's the beauty of having a compiled language. Okay, means in case of interpreted language, you always need the source code in order to get an output. But in case of a compiled language, you definitely not need you need not to have a source code always. Okay, you can have a intermediate file, and then you can just click on that, you can get an output. Okay, so like you would have seen the .exe file, they are called an executable file. So those executable files are nothing but they are a compiled code. Means that is an output of our code, correct? And those output can be treated as an application, means can be run in place of an source code. Okay, you don't need a source code, you simply execute that code and you'll get an output. Okay, so that's the advantage of having a compiled language. So the compilation process involves several stages. Okay, means how the compiler has to go through a several stages. Okay, means if it gets a source code, so the first step that it goes through is a lexical analysis. Okay, so all the codes are going through this lexical analysis, and then the syntax analysis, and then the semantic analysis. Okay, and code after that the code generation and then optimization. Okay, so these are the 3 to 4 steps that actually all the codes has to go through in order to get it compiled. Okay, so the compiler reads the source code, analyzes the structure, and generates an optimized and executable output file in a machine language. Okay, so an example of a compiler is a GNU compiler. So I think when you had started with the C language, so definitely you would have heard of this GNU compiler. The complete name is GNU compiler collection. So it is also, in short, it is also called as a GCC compiler. Okay, so which is free and open source compiler system that supports multiple programming language, including C, C++, Fortran. Okay, another example is the Microsoft Visual C++ compiler, which is used for the compilation of C# language, all the .NET related compiled language. Okay, and which is used to compile C++ code on the Windows. Okay, so we have various compilers available in the market, but it depends on the end user which compiler they actually use. Okay, and also there are compiler language specific, like for all the languages they have a different compiler, so that is language specific. Okay, so for example, let's say we have a C program that prints hello world to the console. Okay, and in order to compile a C code, like if you have written a C code like this is a C code snippet of the C code, and when you wanted to compile it, so you have to run this command on the terminal, like gcc #o and then hello.c. Okay, so if you just run this, so what it will do, it will just compile the hello.c file. Okay, this is my C file, this will get compiled, and once you just compile the code, what it will do, it will generate a byte code or an intermediate code in your machine. Okay, so that is called hello. Okay, It will not have any extension. It will be simply an intermediate file that will get generated in your local. Okay. And then again, if you just want to run the same code, you need not to go to the code. You can simply run this intermediate file again, and it will again give you the same output. Okay. And this is what I was talking about. So the biggest advantage of having a compiled language is you need not to again run the original code. Instead, you can run the intermediate file. You'll get the same output. Okay. In summary, a compiler is a program that translates high-level programming language code into machine code that can execute by computer. Okay. It is used to create standalone executable files that can be run independently. Okay. So we talked about intermediate interpreter and a compiler, and we also talked about the various points which differentiates compiler and interpreter. Okay. And also now we are able to analyze which is better and which is not better, and at which point we can actually select which means interpreter or a compiler. That decision also we are able to make it now. Okay. So we have actually pointed out the differences between programming and scripting language here. So I told you that scripting language are nothing but they are a interpreted language, and programming language are nothing but they are compiled language. Okay. So based on that only, we are actually here with the differences between them. Okay. So programming language and scripting language are both used for software development, but they are differ in several keys. Okay. Here are some of the main difference between programming language and scripting language. Okay. So the basic difference, if you talk about in terms of compilation, is like programming language are typically compiled. Okay. So I told you this, mainly all the programming language that you see, so they are mostly compiled. I think you would have heard of the term JavaScript. Okay. So for running a JavaScript, we don't need any compiler. Okay. Means if you have a Chrome browser or any browser that you have, you can simply write a code there, and then that gets compiled. That so that the statement is clear here. Like for running a scripting language, I don't need any compiler. It is Java in uh, uh, means the web browser enabled. Okay. Means in the web browser you already have it, means in your machine, and you can directly write a JavaScript code there, and it will get executed. So that's how for running a JavaScript I don't need any compiler. Correct. So that's the compilation. Okay. Means I think interpreted language or a scripting language are interpreted, which means which means that the source code is executed directly by the interpreter. Means you always have a source code, and interpreter is going to work on that. Okay. And programming languages are typically compiled, which means that source code is translated into machine code before it is getting executed. Okay. So this is the steps of compilation. Okay. And in terms of complexity, so programming languages are typically more complex than a scripting language. And if you just wanted to uh, learn a programming language, so they are more complex than a scripting. That is very true. And whereas scripting language, they are not very complex. They are actually plain. You need not to write very or object oriented code and all. So they are very plain, and you simply write 3 to 4 lines of code and you get an output. So that is what is a scripting language. You need not to write very big lines of code. In a single file also you can write a very small script. Okay. So that is called as a scripting language. So in terms of complexity, programming language are more complex and scripting language are less complex. And in terms of performance, so compiled programming language generally executes faster than an interpreted scripting language because the code is pre-compiled into machine code before execution. Okay. So this already we have discussed, like compiled language will become faster in case of recompiling, means in case of rerunning the code. Okay. Because you already have an intermediate file. If you rerun your code, so definitely the execution will start from the intermediate file. But in case of interpreted language, if you recompile your code, means if you rerun your code, again the execution has to start from the beginning. But in case of compile, it will not be starting from the beginning, but it will be starting from the intermediate files. Okay. So performance wise, compiled language are faster than the intermediate file scripting languages. Okay. And ease of use. Scripting language are generally easier to learn. Yeah, that is very true. Means scripting language you need not to spend much time. So that is very straightforward. You just learn the syntax and just write it in a plain language. Okay. So that's why scripting language are considered to be easier than the programming languages. Okay. And in terms of portability, so scripting languages are often more portable than the compiled language. The reason is scripting language, if you are just trying to run in a scripting language, so you can simply copy and paste it according to your requirement at the places where you want to run the code. Okay. So for running a scripting language, you always need not to worry about the environment where I am going to run it, because if you run a scripting language, so this compiler will be installed inside that machine already, and then only it will get executed. But in case of programming language, you also have to be careful about the environment, in which environment you are going to put your code. Okay, if that environment is not at all supporting the compiler that you are that your program is based on, so in that case, it is going to be very difficult for you to adapt that code into the different environment. Okay, and that's why uh, scripting language are considered to be more portable than the programming languages. Okay, so we talked about all the differences. So do you find anything which you didn't understand? And you can definitely ask me about any differences that I talked about.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to Java and here, but with less code
Correct.
of
Correct.
Python.
Yeah, correct. Means in terms of execution and all, it is almost similar to Java. Only the difference that you are going to find it in terms of syntaxes. Okay, and also I don't think you will require initial 2 or 3 classes, because in the initial classes we will be talking about the very basic things. Okay, because this class is to be meant for the learner who is not at all knowing anything in Python. Okay, so we have to start with the very basics of the programming. So that's why, and as you already told that you are already aware of the Python, means the Java. So maybe you find it actually uh, like something everything you know already. But maybe uh, if you want, I can actually go faster, or if you want that I should be telling each and everything in a detail, so I can do both. So is it's on your wish.
It can go faster because I can understand the terminology, these all these stuff.
Correct.
Uh,
Correct. Yeah.
be this slow, but if any other persons are joining, for them it's good. But I can understand all these the language what you're speaking and all those stuff.
Okay.
Just at a high level, why this Python is needed, I don't understand why. I mean, like the for Java we need each and every import statements, right?
Correct. Correct. Correct.
But for Python I don't know why without those it was executing and compiling, and that
Correct.
is how possible. That's the one main thing I need to understand actually here. So
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll definitely talk about that. Uh,
yeah,
so yeah, you are only concerned that in Java we have to import the libraries and then only we can use them. Correct. But in case of Python, we don't need them.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So when we start writing Python code, so definitely you will see how in the backend already it is there. Means we have a folder called packages. Okay, so in packages already we have means the basic libraries which are actually used. Okay, so they are already available there. But in case if you want to use any third party libraries, so definitely we also need import here. It is nothing like we don't need import. We need import, but not every time. Like in Java you need every time. Suppose if you want to output anything also, there also you need to have system dot out, means system dot output, something like system dot util class or anything like that. Correct. uh,
Correct. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, means in Python we don't need them exactly. uh, okay, so what is a programming paradigm? We are going to see that first. Okay, and I think we talked much about the differences between Python programming and scripting language. The summary is like programming language are typically compiled, complex, and used for developing large-scale software application, while scripting language are typically interpreted, simpler, and used for automating simple tasks or extending the functionality of the existing software application. Okay, so that's the main aim of writing a programming and a scripting language. Programming language are generally executes faster than the scripting language. That is also clear. And but require more skill and experience to use effectively. Yeah, definitely. When you learn programming language, you require more skills and experiences. Okay. And okay, so next question is what is programming paradigm? Okay, so programming paradigm is a kind of protocol, you can say, the rule set that you define when you start developing an application. Okay, so that is called as a programming paradigm. So suppose if you actually start with a development, or means, so suppose if you wanted to start with an enterprise application development, so in that case you don't need simply, you cannot start directly. So in order to start an application development, you definitely need a set of guidelines and rules, and you will apply which model, I think, software development life cycle model. Okay, so that also waterfall model, and there are various kinds of models that we have. Okay, scrum model and all. So which models you're going to apply in your application development, so all these discussions actually happens before a software development starts. Okay, so so the decision that we are going to take, which model we are going to adapt, and how we are going to start the development. Okay, so all these rule sets that we are going to define, so the way I'm going to think about a software development, so all these complete thing, the complete approach that we're going to discuss is nothing but an programming paradigm. Okay, and like you see here, it is a general approach of software development that provides a set of guidelines, principles, and techniques for solving problems and creating a software. Okay, a programming paradigm defines the basic concepts of structures that are used to organize code, data, and control flow within a software system. Okay, so programming paradigm is a complete concepts of a software development that we are actually start with. Okay, so there are several programming paradigms, each with its own unique approach to software development. Okay, some of the best common programming paradigm include procedural programming language programming paradigm, object-oriented programming paradigm, and then functional programming paradigm, and then is declarative programming paradigm. Okay, so we actually go towards object-oriented programming paradigm, that is OOPS. Okay, so you must have, means any person who means any developer, if you have talked about. Okay, so he may be knowing many languages, but definitely the only common thing that he knows is an OOPS. Okay, OOPS is nothing but a concept. Okay, means the way of writing a program. So that's why object oriented is an approach that actually remains common in throughout the languages. Okay, so if you go through all the languages, so definitely you have to be very good at OOPS. Okay, so OOPS is nothing but a paradigm. Okay, so I told you the approach that we're going to actually take while we start on development. So this paradigm, it emphasizes the use of objects to represent data and functionality. Okay, objects are instances of classes that encapsulate data and methods. Okay, so object-oriented programming paradigm, it always revolves around an object. Okay, and inside the objects you have the data, you have the methods, you have the functionality, and you have to decide how the objects has to communicate with the other object, and how you're going to write a program that can be well extendable, well scalable. Okay, and also if you wanted to modify any further things in your current project, so all these things can be done in future. Okay, so that's why we actually go towards the object oriented programming paradigm, because that is extendable and scalable. Okay, and if you talk about programming paradigm and procedural programming paradigm, so they are nothing but they are also based on certain like functional is dependent on the functions, and the procedures are dependent on the small procedures that you are going to write in order to start the development. Okay, and then like declarative programming language, if we talk about, so you would have heard of SQL language. Okay, so SQL is nothing but a declarative language. So we are going to write a small stored procedures, and also like yeah, you write a DDML, DDL, DML, all the manipulative language that you're going to write, and which gives you a very small output. Okay, so they are called as a declarative programming paradigm. Okay, so SQL actually is an example of declarative programming paradigm, and then example of object-oriented programming paradigm is nothing but an Java, C++, and C#. Okay, so they are the example of, and Python is also coming under object-oriented programming paradigm only. So these are the basic details of object-oriented, the programming paradigm. Okay, and then we also have another one, that is event-driven programming paradigm. Okay, so event-driven programming paradigm, it emphasizes the usage of events and event handlers. Okay, so like you would have seen today, in today's world, we have a various event handlers like Kafka. Okay, Kafka, and also we have a public and subscriber model. Okay, so all these are nothing but event based programmings. Okay, like events are nothing but anything that happens in your program, anything which happens in your system, in your product. Okay, so that is considered as an event, and based on that event trigger, what steps you are going to take, and how you're going to convey that events to throughout your product. So that is nothing but an event driven programming language. Okay, so message queue. Okay, so they are also called as an event driven programming language. Okay, uh, event driven programming are very much popular nowadays because of the instant live updates that you need. Okay, like suppose if you are traveling somewhere. Okay, or if you are chatting with someone, so you want an instant update, correct? If you have sent a message to someone, so instant reply you want. So that is nothing but an example of event driven programming language. So you just send a message, so that is an event, and you receive a message, that is also an event. Okay, so we basically have a chatbot and all. Okay, so that the chatbots and all, they are also an example of event driven programming language. So event driven programming paradigm is nothing but uh, a very popular way of writing small programs or small software developments that we do. Okay, so it was all about programming paradigm that we talked about today. Okay, and so from next class, what we're going to do is we'll be starting with a Python, very basics, and the theory part we are going to just cover it, and then we'll start with the uh, small concepts of Python, and then we'll dive deeper into the code. Okay, so for today we'll keep it this much only, because anyway it was complete theory. So do you have any doubt for today's class? Or
This is, I mean, at a generic way I can understand. So yeah, I mean, I don't have as of now.
okay, sure. Yeah, means till now whatever I've discussed it is common. I think throughout the language, if you talk about, everything is common only. It is nothing specific to Python we have discussed today. So yeah, means you already must be knowing it, but yeah, just to cover, I have to cover. Correct?
Sure, sure. Don't miss any part of this. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. So
Share
we'll
me-
meet tomorrow.
Yeah, if you could share me this document, I'll have a glance. Is that possible?
Yeah, means what I'll do, just give me a few days. I have a GitHub link. Okay, means I'll be sharing you that only, and you can actually clone that repository to your machine, and I'll do the setup and everything in your machine, and you can have all the lectures that I'm going to deliver here. You'll have it in your machine. Okay,
Okay, fine. Yeah. Thank you.
I'll share you that GitHub link only directly. Okay,
Yep.
Are you on GitHub, correct? Or even if you are not there, I'll help you to clone it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye bye. We can meet. We'll meet tomorrow. Thank you. Bye bye.